Since the very beginning in January, and we're continuing to kind of go through Proverbs. And I've said on a number of occasions, one of the things I really appreciate about Proverbs is just in simply how hands-on it is. That Proverbs is individuals looking back upon their life and essentially making comments about what it looks like to truly live with God. And that's the understanding of what is wisdom in terms of the Bible as to when we begin to acknowledge God in the midst of all of life. And what is so great about Proverbs is just how practical, just how hands-on it can be. I also made a statement probably a couple of weeks ago that in many ways there's probably not many situations in life that there isn't actually a proverb to attach with it. And so fortunately I have other people kind of reading through Proverbs with me, and someone pointed out to me that there's even a proverb for the Olympics. Amazing. Even a proverb for the Olympics. Particularly for those individuals in the Olympics that maybe did not get the medal that they had hoped. I was thinking of the men's American hockey team. Is there any Americans here? I'm going to give you a word of consolation here. It's from Proverbs 22, verse 1. I don't make this up, people. It's right. Proverbs 22, 1. To be esteemed, so to have a good name, is better than silver or gold. I don't know, I might take the gold medal, but that's just me, I don't know. But there we begin to see it, right? We begin to see again just the practicality of the book of Proverbs and just how it speaks into our lives. But as I thought about this coming week, and the various situations and the various circumstances that we have been dealing with, I began to think more specifically about the various choices that I make in my life. You know, we all make choices. We all make kind of quick decisions sometimes. There's other times in life where we have those bigger decisions that we need to make, and oftentimes we want to talk to other people and we want to get advice to other people. But all of us make choices and decisions daily. The majority of them fall into the category of just this is the way we're going to go because it's the nature of who we are. It is the habits that we have formed. And so I stopped for a moment and began to think, why do I make the decisions that I do? What is it in my life that guides my choices? Not just simply the big ones, but the day-to-day ones as well. You know, the choices when, someone interrupts us or someone cuts us off, to not allow that to ruin our day. Or the choice when we have the opportunity to maybe promote ourselves, but we decide to pull back in order to push someone else into the spotlight. How does it happen? And as I began to realize more and more that as followers of Jesus, how much of that reality begins to filter down into the day-by-day decisions that we make? Because a lot of time we give a lot of language to the bigger decisions and the bigger choices that, if someone has a big important decision to make, we say, you know what, I will be praying for you, right? We kind of throw that card in as in the sense of saying, this is a big decision to make. You should probably bring God in on this choice. But what about the every other little decisions that we make? Do we intentionally, do we begin to habitually allow God to influence everything that we do? And so this morning I want to kind of look at just a couple of proverbs that kind of help sort us out in the midst of how do we begin to truly allow God to influence every choice, every decision that we make. And to start off, I want to jump back into the passage that Jessica just read. It's a well-known passage. It's one of those times at the time of Jesus' ministry where Jesus is always being inundated with questions. Right? Sometimes people ask questions of Jesus because they legitimately want to know the answer. Other times they're trying to trap him to see, okay, maybe I can get Jesus to kind of stumble up a little bit here or there. But we're told in this particular case that a teacher of the law, and for us, that kind of identifies him as an individual who knew his Hebrew scriptures. So what we now refer to as the Old Testament, we know that in Jesus' day there was no New Testament, that was yet to come. but they had the Old Testament that we have today. And so this teacher of the law came to Jesus because he saw how well Jesus had answered questions. And he says, Jesus, here's the situation. You know all the laws that Moses has given to us from God. You know all the laws and the understandings and the rules of life. There is a lot of them. So Jesus, could you do us a favor? Could you just hone us in on the most important one? You know, like, what is the most important one that we should be focusing upon? And Jesus answers. He says, the most important one is this: love God with everything. Love him every day of the week, every week of the month, every month of the year. Give God everything that you got. And the second is this, and you almost kind of wonder if the guy's like, no, Jesus, I'm good. I just asked for one. Why do you always got to do that, Jesus? You always got to take the question and give me a little bit more. He says the second one is this: love your neighbor as yourself. But as I began to reread it again, I realized that Jesus was just answering the same question. He was giving the most important commandment, and then he was actually giving application as well. That the second commandment is application to what Jesus had just previously said. He said, love God with everything. And so that the people wouldn't be misunderstood when they walked away, he says, and this is what I mean by love God with everything. Love your neighbor as you would love yourself. And so there we begin to see this practical application. And so as we come back to our original question as to how do we determine the choices, how do we determine the decisions that we make, we begin to think of those and say, okay, how am I loving God in the midst of this? And how am I loving others in the midst of the choices and the decisions that I make? Do you begin to see how Jesus, again, just becomes, in such a way, creating a new understanding? Because so many of our decisions that we make are oftentimes based around the benefit to ourselves. And Jesus is saying, wait a second here. What if you live life in a different sort of way? You know, as I sit back and I look at those two commandments and I just look at that and unpack it, I doubt that there is a follower of Jesus that would disagree with that and say, well, wait a second here. You're telling me the most important one is to love God and to love others. What about giving like 10% to charity? Isn't that more important? What about the importance of going to church regularly? Isn't like, no one's going to disagree with what Jesus has to say here. But what's incredibly infuriating at times is that it's not even more specific as that. And I began to ask the question, why would Jesus not get even more specific? Why is Jesus so often more general in terms of his explanation as to what it looks like to follow him? I think for two reasons. The first reason is Jesus is reacting so often in his ministry against the establishment of just simple religious rules and rituals. You see, so often the people that Jesus kind of goes at are those individuals who is always trying to box in and identify through a list what it truly means to be a follower of God. And Jesus is wise to this. He understands that if what we're talking about is a relationship, then what becomes more important is our priorities, is our attitudes, is our daily decisions. I mean, think about it in this way. Think of any other significant, intimate relationship that you are in, whether it's with your spouse or with your parents or with your kids, and you just went up to them and said, okay, listen up. What are the absolute rules that I have to continue to follow so that you won't kick me to the curb? What are they? And so often that's what religion presents to God. It's like, what are the things that we have to do so that you will continue to put up with us? And like any growing, thriving, dynamic relationship, we understand that there are rules. We understand that there are priorities. We understand there are barriers that you do not cross. But the greater understanding is that this is a relationship to be developed. to be lived with. And so I think that's the first reason that Jesus was more general. The second is because Jesus, again, is highlighting one of the key teachings of the Bible. And that is what God desires above everything else is daily living. Do you notice how the guy who asked the question of Jesus actually followed it up with an even further interpretation? He says, Jesus, yeah, you are so right. It's about loving you. It's about loving others. It's more important than even sacrifices or offerings, which is a huge statement considering the day and the person that is speaking. That it's about this daily living with God. Is God concerned that you give to the poor and you give to ministries? Absolutely. Is God concerned and desires you to be a part of a body of believers? Absolutely. But that's not the bottom line. The bottom line always comes back to our relationship with Him and then our relationship with others. So often when we read through the Bible, when you see God beginning to lay out for others what He desires them to do, there's this incredible element of trust. I know for a lot of us, there's probably frustrations perhaps in wanting to know, God, give me the bigger picture. You know, in my choices and my decisions, you know, what is it specifically that you want me to do? But the danger in going down that path is rarely does God lay out for everyone all the steps that they need to take. It doesn't mean that God does not have a plan. What it means is just simply that God has not allowed us to be in on the plan at the same level that He is. Look at Abraham. He said to Abraham, you know, I'm going to make you into a great nation. I'm going to make your name great. I'm going to increase your family. God's like, step number one, Abraham, pack your bags, pack your family, you're heading that way. He just showed him the first step, that first step of daily living. Or imagine Joseph. Thank goodness God didn't reveal His plan to Joseph initially when He says, you know what, things are going to go well. Then you're going to get a little cocky and you're going to tell your brothers about a dream of how they're going to bow down to you. And then they're going to get really annoyed at you and they're going to want to kill you. But then they sell you and then you get sold as a slave and then you get thrown in prison and then your life is really terrible for a long time. But then at the very end, I'm going to show up and I'm going to make you powerful and great. And Joseph would be like, you know, I just want to kind of live an ordinary life. I'm kind of good right here. You know, and so sometimes I believe that is that God doesn't always reveal everything to us initially because maybe what He needs for us is to take that initial step. To take that initial step. Take that initial step. And then suddenly as we begin to look back at the daily living of following God, we realize, wow, God has brought me from here to here. If I knew all of that ahead of time, I would have stayed comfortably here. I know for some of you, you probably have that experience in your own life as we begin to see just this reality. And so the area I want to look at this morning is just how do we begin to get into that mindset of making those daily choices with the belief that God is in the midst of them, that God has a plan for us, and that God is always going to be with us. Because I believe that when we wrap our minds around this, we not only begin to deepen our own faith, but God is using the daily choices that we to make an incredible difference in the lives of those around us. You know, so often we look at difference makers in the Bible. We look at difference makers in the world, and we jump from this place all the way over to this place, but we fail to see everything else in the middle and fail to understand that it was the daily decisions and choices to continue to follow God in the midst of all of life that brought them from here to here. So 2 Proverbs I want to look at this morning. The first one is 16 verse 3. We're going to pull it up on the screens. It says, "Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed." Again, it's the proverb saying, commit to God whatever you do, whether big, whether small, whether seemingly unimportant or boring. Commit to the Lord everything that you do, and your plans will succeed. Now, we're going to get to that whole aspect of success in a moment, so just kind of tuck that over there for a second. And then in verse 16:9, Proverbs 16:9, it says, in your heart you plan your course, but the Lord determines your steps. You see, there's nothing wrong with us having an idea of wanting to begin to plot our course, of making those daily decisions in a certain direction. You know, there is real danger when we simply sit back and be complacent and say, well, I'm just trying to discern and understand what is God's will for my life? What does God desire for me? And what God is saying is begin to take steps in a direction that is honoring to me, and it will become more obvious to you. But what it means is that although we are going in a certain direction, we have this greater understanding that it is God who is in control of our life. You see, so often we fail to get this, because then when suddenly we have a plan and our plan gets taken off course, one of two things can happen. We can either get incredibly annoyed at God and say, God, what are you doing? I had a great plan, and now I'm not on that plan. And so you get annoyed at God, or you begin to doubt, am I really following God? Maybe this isn't what God had in mind. Maybe, but let's spend less time worrying about that and more time about just simply honoring God in the midst of our daily decisions and choices, because God is the one determining our steps. It means we begin to understand at even greater lengths what it means to daily follow Him. As a church, when we think of what is our purpose, what is our decisions, why do we make the choices that we do? Why do we do the ministries that we do? Because I don't think there's a church out there that would argue with this initial teaching of Jesus. It says, listen, love me and love others. But when you look at other churches, we focus on different ministries. We may focus on different things. And for us as a church, we focus on that phrase, we want to gather in order to scatter. Because for me, what that begins to do is to depict for us the reality of the daily living. The importance of coming together to absolutely be encouraged, to absolutely celebrate, but to be challenged to truly hear from God. And one of the ways that we honor God is by saying, you're important enough to me that I want to make you a priority in the midst of my life. So we gather here on Sundays and at other places and at other times, not simply for the purpose of getting together and hanging out, but so that God can then use us in all the other places that He scatters us to in order to bring this abundant life that He has already given to us. I heard one guy speak. A number of the small groups have focused on his book, but it's Francis Chan speaking of the forgotten God. And one of the things that he speaks about in his book is we should spend less time worrying about next year or 5 years and focus more about simply living life with God today. Because if we begin to do that every day, that is dramatically going to change the outcome of where we may be in a year from now or in 2. So how do we do it? Why do we do it? Just want to close with just 2 things that I have learned that have helped benefit me in living this daily life with God. 2 valuable lessons that have had an incredible impact on me, and I see it not only played out in my life, but in the life of this church. You see, one of the outcomes of daily living teaches me that when I focus on Jesus day by day, I actually have a greater impact in the midst of life. Let me phrase it this way. When I focus on Jesus day by day, I actually make an even bigger difference. Because what we begin to see is God is setting us up for opportunities. You may be familiar with the story of Esther in the Old Testament. Esther was someone who was brought up through the ranks and eventually became the queen of the nation. And it was a very difficult and turbulent time for the Jewish people. A time where actually the right-hand man to the king wanted to exterminate all of the Jews. And nobody had access to the king like the queen. And her uncle came to her and said, Esther, you've been prepared for a time such as this. Here's an opportunity for you to speak to the king so that he will change his ways to protect the Jewish people. You see, let's be honest with ourselves. If we're not daily following Jesus in the seemingly simple decisions of life, do we really think we're going to surrender the bigger pieces of pie when they come down the line? The bigger decisions around finances, or around sacrifice, or around directions that we want to go. You see, if we want to honor God with the big decisions, we have to honor him with the small ones as well. And it's so often in honoring him in the small ones that the bigger decisions begin to form themselves. Let me give you an example from this church. This past fall, we started this new initiative, this new ministry, the Drop-In. And the Drop-In is essentially on Thursdays from 11 to 1, a space and an opportunity for people to come and to hang out. People play games, people jump on the internet, there is food, there is coffee. There are people who are simply there just to give the ministry of presence. But this has been a conversation that has been going on for a number of years. And over the past number of years, different people have come and have talked about, what are some possibilities? What are some opportunities? This congregation has garnered the reputation in the community as a congregation that wants to make a difference in the community in which they live. I got a phone call back in the fall from the Children's Aid Society asking me if they could meet with me. I thought, professionally or personally? And so I show up at the office and I sit down and I'm all ready to go, and they say, listen, we have been in this community for 11 years and very few people know about our services. And we want to be better known in this community. Can we partner with you? And I was like, with the church? And they said, yeah. Because we see the difference that you are making in the community. Through the community dinner, through the World Vision Luncheon, through this freezer program. They started rhyming off ministries of our church, and I'm like, how do you know about these things? Because they're like, we deal with the families that are receiving the benefits. And they said, we want to partner with you. And so one of the great things that has begun to happen is through the Drop-In, is it has become a community initiative that just seems to be housed here. But Children's Aid is in on it. Brand Housing is in on it. The Food Bank is in on it. Friendship House is in on it. A number of other churches are in on it. And what we begin to see is saying, how can we partner together to make this a better community? I would not have likely been able to have those conversations if these other ministries would not have already paved the way. This Saturday night is a perfect example. You saw it in your bulletin. We're hosting the movie Girl Rising. It's a documentary of 9 women around the country that truly shows the impact that education has made in their life. And because of the impact that we have made through World Vision came to us and says, can you host it for us because you have a voice in your community? And as a result of that, we're bringing in Children's Aid, we're bringing in Big Brothers and Sisters, other organizations, so when people come and when people are moved, we can simply say to them, here are some opportunities to make a difference in the lives of kids. You see, it doesn't have to be about our programs. It doesn't have to be about our ministries. It's about that daily living and making a difference. One final thing about makes a bigger difference. You probably know last June, I went and spoke to council about a pedestrian cross signal. I'm going back on Wednesday to again encourage them to do that. But what was interesting is when I showed up for the meeting with some of council, the first 5 to 10 minutes weren't even spent talking about the signal. They want to talk about the issue of transportation in Paris. And they said, would I and would others from our church be willing to have that conversation with them? Because we are seen as a church that truly cares. I don't want to belabor this point, but you begin to see the reality of just faithfully following Jesus in the day by day gives you opportunities at a greater level. And so why would it be any different for any of us in our own personal lives? The second thing that I believe day by day living affords us to do is that it combats disappointment. The verse I really want to hone in on is Proverbs 16:9. It's still up there. It says, in our heart, we plan our course, but God determines the steps. This is one of those proverbs that I think we have to drill down deep. Because so often, we can begin to plan our steps. We can begin to make necessary decisions, but when things blow up, or things may not go as we had hoped or as we had wanted, when we focus again on that proverb, we realize, wait a second, God is in control. He is the one that is determining my steps. You see, you have to interpret Proverbs 16:3 with Proverbs 16:9. So remember, God determines our steps. So if we can go back to Proverbs 16:3, it says, commit to the Lord whatever you do. So our committing is our daily living, and your plans will succeed. Quiz time. Whose plans? Oh, don't we know? Our plans? God's plans? Whose plans? God's plans, right? We so often value success on, well, has it worked out exactly like I had wanted? But if we understand those verses, how they work together, that when we commit our daily living to God, God's plans are always going to succeed. Always going to succeed. That becomes the bedrock of hope. That becomes the reality of how we live, so that when disappointment comes, it doesn't destroy. And sometimes it's big, but sometimes it's small, and we see that worked out in our own life as well. One example from this church, because we make a lot of decisions, and oftentimes as I look back on the things that have happened, I realize that there was a lot of things that didn't go according to plan. And anytime I get invited to go and to speak at other churches, because they see the things that are happening in this place, and they say, you know what, tell us about your plan. I said, okay, first of all, let me just get one thing straight here. We got here because we thought we were going here, and we were just wise enough to make the turn when God kind of directed us that way. One real small example. 2 years ago, the Monday morning women's book club decided to do a community garden in our backyard, which was the first mistake, because put it under Rebecca and mine authority. Neither of us we don't even know what a green thumb is supposed to look like, right? So we needed people looking over it all the time. And it was that hot summer, and let me put it this way, the animals were incredibly well fed. I don't know how they got in, but we built up fences and more fences, and there was this groundhog that must have been the smartest creature on this earth. Well, smarter than me anyway, so let's just... But out of it, they were able to gather vegetables, and they were able to make soups and pass the sauces and use it as part of fill the freezer. And so the following year came around, and I kind of asked Rebecca and the other women, so are you going to do another community garden? They're like, no, that wasn't our thing. And then someone else came up with the idea of, wait a second, other people have gardens. Other people who know how to grow gardens have gardens. Why don't, Joel, you talk to them? See, it's good to have wise people around you. And so that's exactly what we did. And this past summer, people who had gardens brought in their extra vegetables. And on a given week, we'd help between 10 to 12 families with fresh produce all the time. And now I have people coming to me in the summer saying, or in the winter saying, we're going to do it again, right? Because I'm going to grow more. How much can you take? And I'm like, bring whatever you have. But if we were so stuck on a community garden because that's a program that we have to do, we'd never see God open up these doors. You see, when you drill down that verse deep, that God determines your steps, sometimes disappointment, sometimes failure, as hard as it can be, are some of the best things for us in life. Because it enables us to take a step back and to say, okay, God, this isn't about me. What direction do you need for me to go? In a few minutes, we're going to gather back in here and talk about budget. We're going to talk about our annual meeting. You know, so often people want perhaps more specifics. But for me, this annual meeting is always about looking back and to seeing how God has guided our steps through individuals' daily living life with Him. That's what that report is all about. And as we move forward into 2014, this is our best attempt to say these are the plans that we believe God is laying before us. May we make a wrong turn? Absolutely. Do we have it completely figured out? Most certainly not. But what we want to do is to daily live our life in such a way that it will not only guide us individually, it will not only guide us as a church corporately, but it will begin to make an incredible difference in this world, in this community that we live. And this is the most important thing. No matter what else we talk about in this place, it will make no difference if we don't make the conscious decision to say, today, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. Because when we do it together, it's an incredible impact, not only in our lives, but in the lives of others. And that's why we gather, to never forget that we are not in this alone. So that when we scatter, we become God's difference makers in the communities in which we live. Please stand as we sing together.
All the way my Savior leads me, what I hide to ask beside. Can I doubt His tender mercy, who through life has been my guide? Heavenly peace, divinest comfort, here by faith in Him to dwell. For I know whate'er befall me, Jesus doeth all things well. For I know whate'er befall me, Jesus doeth all things well. winding path I tread, gives me grace for every trial, feeds me with the living bread. Though my weary steps may falter, and my soul athirst may be, gushing from the rock before me, know a spring of joy I see. Gushing from the rock before me, know a spring of joy I see. All the way my Savior leads me, oh, the fullness of His love, perfect rest to me is promised in my Father's house above. And my spirit, clothed immortal, wings its flight to realms of day. This my song through endless ages, Jesus led me all the way. This my song through endless ages, Jesus led me all the way.
Please be seated. Let us pray together. Lord Jesus, as we just think of those words of that song, the words that you spoke so many years ago, but just continue to live out in reality. Lord, allow us to live every day with you. Allow us to follow you and to allow you, the one, to direct us, not to simply invite you into what we are doing. Lord, it seems so simple to just give one day at a time to you, but it can make such a profound difference in our lives and in the lives of those around us. Lord, I believe that we want to make a difference. We want to make a difference in our families and in the places where we go to work, in the communities and the neighborhoods in which we live. We want to make a difference. And so, Lord Jesus, we just ask that we would follow you. That when we make decisions, that we'd be mindful of you, that we would think more of you and less often of ourselves. Allow us to not be completely beat down by disappointments or by failures, but to see them as opportunities to again be refocused by you. Lord, it's so hard to speak specifically about this because all of us are in different places and are dealing with different things. So I just pray that your Holy Spirit would truly begin to put footings under this reality. That this is not just simply a principle that we take with us, but it begins to truly impact who we are and how we live. That in the little things, in the big things, we would honor you in all of it. And so that as we begin to look back, we can see your fingerprints all over it. Lord Jesus, we are so grateful for this church and for the things that have been happening and the things we trust that will continue to happen. As we realize the faithfulness of those people around these various ministries, allow them to be